Welcome to Hunters Connect. I'm Michael. I'm here with Jonathan today. This is the third video in this series. And in the previous two videos, we kind of established that Jonathan, is new to hunting. He doesn't have a ton of hunting experience, but he wants to archery hunt this year. Since then, he's been practicing with his bow. And tomorrow, we're going hunting for the first time. So today in this video, we're going to cover how to get prepared for this hunt. So Jonathan, why don't you tell these guys what we're hunting for, what state we're in, what time of the year it is, and how you decided on hunting in this spot.
So we're going to be hunting here in Montana, specifically for white-tailed deer, but even more specifically, white-tailed does. I have a buddy who has access to some private property with some good whitetail hunting, and when you're working with private landowners, you gotta kind of go with what they want because it's their property. So he said, no bucks, leave the bucks alone, which is fine. I have a doe tag. And he said, if I see a black bear, to shoot a black bear. So we have the potential for a white-tailed doe or a black bear tomorrow. But we're going to leave the bucks alone because that's what the private landowner has requested.
So that's pretty sweet that you got permission from your buddy to hunt here. We've already done a video on Hunters Connect on how to acquire land or permission to hunt on private land. So if you guys want to check that one out, it's up here. It was shot by yours truly. And we just kind of gave some tips on how to approach a landowner and hopefully get permission to hunt on their property. So in Montana, the season opens for archery hunting a little bit earlier than a lot of other states. So while we're able to hunt here in September and October, you need to check in your state all the regulations to make sure that you're hunting during the right times of the year. We also looked at your doe tag and made sure that it's good for this area that we're hunting in. So we've checked all those boxes. One of the things to consider for this in our planning here is the seasonality and the seasonal needs of the species we're hunting. It's early October, so I would consider this early season to pre-rut. A lot of people say there's an October lull, but that doesn't really even matter for a white-tailed doe because we're just hunting white-tailed does here. So the early season to the pre-rut, we're going to be focusing more on food sources, from my experience. And these does are going to be wanting the best food. So that's something that we're definitely going to take into consideration here. If it was a pre-rut or a peak rut time of the year, I wouldn't even be thinking about being around the food sources as much. I would be thinking about being in timber or what have you, because the bucks are going to be chasing does around. They're going to be scattered and dispersed, and everything's just a little bit more interrupted. And then following that rut period, there's a pre-rut, a peak rut, late rut, post-rut time frame where the rutting starts to calm down. And the deer kind of relax. The bucks are starting to, they might be rutting, some of them may be rutting, it just depends on if there's does in the area that are hot or not, meaning in their estrus cycle, to the late season where pretty much all deer are just trying to survive at that time. And this spot would actually be a really good late season spot too, with all the food that we perceive to be there. That's something to consider too. When we get there tomorrow, we're gonna have to see what these fields are planted in.
Right.
Because if there's alfalfa over here and there's grain over here, they're probably gonna be more keyed on one or the other. So there's different needs based on the different seasons. And for our hunt here, for the 2 days we're going, it's gonna be the early season by most people's standards. And that's going to be a food pattern to bedding pattern for both bucks and does. But since we're specifically targeting the does, I can almost guarantee you the only thing they're going to be doing is going to feed and then coming back to cover and then going to feed and then coming back to cover. So with that being said, we'll go into kind of Jonathan's strategy for how we plan to hunt these deer.
So just driving around Sunset, I've seen most of them on private property in agricultural fields feeding. And so I know that they're not rutting right now. The bucks aren't chasing the does around. Pretty much the bucks are hanging out with other bucks with the does in these large kind of areas where they're getting some good grazing at this point. So And I know they like to bed in kind of shelter, brushy, treed areas. So I'm looking for some edge habitat where they will be doing some bedding close to the agricultural fields where they're going to be doing some feeding.
Sweet, yeah. I think you kind of hit it on the head almost perfectly. I think that you're right in the fact that specifically the does are going to be keying in on food, kind of like they'll be doing all year, because that's what they need to do is to stay alive, is feed and stay close to shelter. Where the bucks in November, when they are rutting, they could care less about food. They're running around trying to find these does. Well, where do you find the does? Hopefully, in most cases, it's going to be around food sources and timber or a good bedding area. And looking at the map, it seems to, like there's a lot of potential areas here. So one of the things that's super beneficial to do before you go out and actually hunt, like what we're doing now previous to the hunt, is look at aerial imagery. And it can give you a lay of the land before you ever step foot there. So what Jonathan and I are doing, and what we're going to throw up on the screen, is looking at aerial map right now and deciding what could possibly be a good spot to start at in the morning. And then once we get there in the morning, we're going to learn while we're actually hunting a whole bunch of different things, and then make our plan for the following day. Or hopefully maybe we'll get one in the morning. But so what in this map is most appealing to you, and why so?
So I know that the whitetails like lower elevation. They like kind of the riparian habitat near rivers and streams. And again, the agricultural fields. So I'm seeing just a good mixture of kind of rivers and streams with kind of forest bands that follow the rivers and streams, and then kind of spotted with agricultural land that would be good for grazing. So on this private property piece that we have access to, I see a little bit of everything, and so we kind of have a bunch of different spots I'd like to check out using spot and stock on the ground.
Cool, yeah. So, and that kind of touches on another point. Just because we are hunting on private, but these tactics still apply to if you're hunting on a public land piece. A lot of these, as you can see too, budge up to timber patches. You can see there's an ag field right here, and then there's a little ditch in here with some trees. You can assume possibly that those deer are feeding in those fields on the public or on the private, and then coming in onto the public to bed. So while there's a lot more of it in this area, these rules generally apply to public land hunting as well. The one thing that we're going to have that's an advantage for us is that we know that nobody's going to be there tomorrow because you talked with your buddy.
Yeah.
And so there's not going to be a lot of hunting pressure. So we won't really have to focus on we won't have to focus our game plan so much about how to get away from people. We'll just be able to kind of do it in a sense of like, it makes sense that they're feeding and there's not going to be an obstruction to them bedding in this area. So tomorrow's October 1st. It's definitely not the rut here. And the reason why it might be more advantageous to do spot and stock is that these deer are going to be a little bit more patternable because they're not being chased around by a buck. Again, in our scenario here that it's private land, you're not going to have as much pressure. So if we are able to observe in the morning what's going on, the odds are good that they're going to kind of follow that same pattern in my experience. If you were hunting a public piece, it might be different if they're getting pushed around by different hunters. Mm-hmm. But here, you can we'll find out tomorrow when we actually get there and see what the ranchers do, how they work through the day. Maybe they spend a lot of time on this north part and the southern part is less disturbed. And if we find deer down there, and if they're coming from a specific feeding area to a specific bedding area in the morning, you're going to expect them to go from that spot back to the feeding area in the afternoon. So therefore, spot and stalking in this time of the year could be very, very good because they're patternable, I would say.
Okay.
And that's just something that I've learned over the years of doing this, is that deer and really any animal that ruts is a little bit more patternable at the beginning part of the season, where they're on, a feeding pattern rather than chasing does all day, running all across the universe to find a mate.
Okay.
So I think that the spot and stock could work really well. Are you trying to barge in there? Or are you trying to, kind kind of hunt from a distance, or?
So I would like to, once we park the truck, I would like to get on one of these edges, kind of one of the peripheries of like that zone between the field and the trees, because we've got thick vegetation along the stream, and then we've got a field right next to it. So I would like to be hidden. I don't know if we should build a brush blind or just find some thick timber in there. And we've got October 1st and 2nd to hunt, so I think we might bring your ground blind anyway. And just for the first day, we'll spot and stalk and maybe set up the ground blind the second day if we're not successful. But what I would like to do first off is just kind of get to the edge of a field, stay in the thick timber, and just watch and see what they do.
Yeah, I think that's a good plan, seeing as like I said earlier, they're probably going to be coming back from feeding all night in the morning, and we might be just set up in like an ambush spot, is what somebody, like most people would call that, is like we're anticipating them to come this way, and we're going to ambush them in the thick bedding area or thick timber, whatever you want to call it, thicket. Like you said, you got this permission from your buddy. I'm assuming, have you ever been out here? Or?
No, this would be the first time.
Okay, cool. So when we get there tomorrow, do you have a plan for what specifically you want to do when we get there? Or?
So yeah, I'm assuming, first of all, we have to find the deer, but I would like to be somewhere where we have some timber to hide in, but we have, there's a pinch point here where there's a field on either side. And I would just basically like to use binoculars in the morning to scout out in the fields to find deer, and then stay kind of at that edge zone between, like in the stream area where there's thick trees, and then just see if we can find any tracks, any trails that they look like they've been frequenting. So we just stay in the timber, see them out in the field, and then wait till they come in.
So you're trying to kind of observe the first morning, not saying you're not going to actively hunt a deer that's in a position that is worth going after, but it would be kind of nice to observe a little bit, and not, because it's not like we have a huge piece here. It's kind of, it's a smaller section. It's about 500, and you said some acres,
something like that.
And to people out east, that's a huge expanse of land. Out here, it's a good chunk, but we can cover that a lot with glassing, like you were saying, from cover, and then making a good play on what we see for the following. And then making a good plan for the evening tomorrow, or for the next day, because we're coming back the next day.
Yeah.
And I like what you said earlier about pinch points. Those are really good things to look for when you're aerial scouting, so to speak. And like you said right there, that's a really good pinch point. And a pinch point is basically a funnel that deer like to use. It's an area that, like, it might be due to topography or dense undergrowth or what have you, that pinches those deer into a spot it's easier to travel, essentially. So we'll be looking for things like that. We'll be looking for sign that maybe a trail is actively being used. We'll look for scat, all sorts of stuff. So that's a really good strategy. One of the things that we're gonna have to be super mindful of, and something that when I first started hunting I didn't really pay close attention to it, even though I knew it was super important, is that deer, they can smell really well. And I'm sure you know that, but maybe our viewers aren't quite familiar with that, but like that is their way of sensing danger. So tomorrow we went ahead and checked the weather and the wind forecast. We're gonna have a western wind, which sets up perfect for this spot. So once we, in the morning, do it like what you're saying, we're going to go down there and kind of see what's going on, see if we see any sign. And if we do wind up finding a spot maybe where we want to hang out and catch some does working through that timber, we're going to definitely have to make sure that the wind is always hitting us in the face and not blowing to where we anticipate the animals to be, because that is pretty much the best way to ruin your hunt, is to have your wind at your back blowing towards the animals that you're trying to go after. So that's one of the things that, like, when I first started hunting, I really struggled with. I wanted to go hunting no matter what, and I didn't really pay attention to the wind. As I've kind of progressed through my hunting life, using the wind has been critical, and especially in western states, but pretty much anywhere. So we'll be using our wind indicators a bunch. And that kind of, is a good point too. Some of the gear that we'll be using tomorrow, binoculars for sure. You're going to have your bow. You'll have a release, all the stuff you need for that. So you're going to have game bags, but You probably won't need to use game bags, because if you do wind up getting one, a doe is small enough, and because we're able to be on this private property, it's not going to be a very far haul out of there if you are able to. You're going to have your tags first and foremost,
Yep.
hunting license, and we'll bring some snacks because we're going to hang out all day, and it's going to be in the 70s, you said, so we'll bring a jacket for the morning, and however you want to get ready for it. But I think that we'll be able to have kind of a light setup. We don't really need to bring a whole bunch of stuff, because we'll be able to hop back to the truck if we need to mid-afternoon or whatever.
And I'll bring a rangefinder, because I'm still not super comfortable with eyeballing distances yet. So I'll definitely
absolutely
need that.
So tomorrow's going to be sweet. I'm looking forward to having you take the reins and kind of doing what you want to do. And as we go, if there's anything that needs to be brought up or talked about, we'll talk about it. And maybe there'll be some little things that you do that might be learning points, and I'll kind of help you out through that. But I think what you got so far is a really good plan, and maybe we'll be able to be successful tomorrow. If not, hopefully the next day.
Yeah, hopefully we spot them in the morning out feeding and find out where they bed in the afternoon and go from there.
Yeah, and like I said, preparing for a hunt, whether it's on public or private, it's pretty much the same thing. Like, I always like to start with aerial imagery, looking at an area and seeing, during that time of the year, what does this specific animal want? Because we're hunting white-tailed does, they're going to want to be in some feed. And on this map, there's plenty of feed all around, followed by good cover and good bedding areas, so to speak, for these deer to hang out on. So hopefully we're going to be able to find some deer tomorrow and have a good little episode for you guys to watch.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. See if we can tie it all together. But I'm going to go shoot some more arrows and add a couple more targets in preparation for tomorrow, and see how it goes.
Sweet, yeah. So be sure to come back to Hunters Connect. This is going to be a fun series. I'm really looking forward to getting out and doing some hunting with you, and it's going to be fun. We're going to learn a lot. And thanks for watching Hunters Connect.